Hello everyone, welcome to this lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to start a new topic in numerical methods. Now this topic is called solving systems of equations. And in this lesson, we're going to cover some introductory and very essential topics that are going to be the cornerstone when we're discussing all of this later. Now, one of the concepts that are very important when it comes to talking about systems of equations is a concept of an array. Now, an array in programming is an object that stores data. Now, this data can come in one of three forms. This data can come in the form of a column. In this case, we have a column made up of three rows, and we have A1, A2, A3. So this can store any type of data. In numerical methods, this data is usually numbers, or it can be maybe letters, can be words, or it can be phrases. Now, this data can also take a form of a row, right? A single row. And you can see this is basically the transpose of this, which we're going to talk later what that means. So if we have a single column or a single row, this type of array is called a vector. Okay, so what about if I have a mixture of columns and rows? So what you can see here, we can have three columns and we have three rows. Well, this is called a 3 by 3 matrix because we have three columns and three rows. So an array is an object that stores data. It can either store data in terms of columns or a single column or a single row. Again, that's what we would call a vector. Or it can store it in terms of a mixture of columns and rows, and that's what we call a matrix. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to create a vector array and a matrix array inside of VBA, how to input numbers from the Excel sheet and output them back onto Excel sheet, both for the vector and the matrix. So this lesson is going to be relatively short. So let's go ahead. Let's call maybe let's call it matrix, say underscore vector. And so I created my sub. So the first thing I want to do is let's actually use comments. I'm going to create, the first thing I'm going to do in my program is create vector and B and matrix A. Okay, so that's the first thing I will do in terms of my program. After I create vector B and matrix A, what I want to do is I want to input vector B and matrix A, right? I want to get these number inside here. Okay, I forgot the apostrophe. Now, the third thing I want to do is I want to display vector B and matrix A. So let's go ahead. So in terms of creating matrix B and vector B and matrix A, we use a keyword called dim, and dim stands for dimensionalize. So I'm going to say B, and when I say dimensionalize, you have to give the form. So if I call B, that's my array. What is the array form? And in this case, I wanted to store 10 numbers. So I'm going to say B of 10. So that says create a vector B that can store 10 data points, whether that's string array, whether there is a phrase, a letter, but in this case is going to be a set of numbers. I'm going to do the same thing for the matrix A. I'm going to say dim and I'm going to say A. But in terms of A, I have 3 rows and 3 columns. So now I have the vector B and matrix A created, and we use the dim keyword. Now, how do we input vector B and matrix A? Well, we're going to use loops, right? So we're going to say for I equal to 1 to 10, and I'm going to say B of, say, I, okay, is equal to cells. And what do we have this? This is going to be, I want to start on row 15, so I'm going to say 14 plus I. And this is on column 2. And then I'm going to say next I. So let's see what's happening here. So for the first loop, it's going to be B1 is equal to cells 15 and 2, which is this one. Then it's going to loop again. B2 is cells 16 and 2. And so on. So you can see this is how the notation of the vector is. B of I and it keeps looping until it occupies B1, B2, B3, all the way to B10. So this takes care of B. So let's actually go ahead, before we actually input A, let's go ahead and display B. And displaying B is just the reverse of this equation, because we know whatever's on the right is stored in whatever's on the left. So what we're doing here is we're taking whatever's in these cells and we're storing it here. So now we want to do the reverse. We want to take whatever's in B, right? Whatever's in now stored in B, and I want to display it here. So the only difference between that is this is going to be column 3. So if I go ahead and run this code, right? So it creates B and A, it inputs all these 10 numbers inside of B, and then this code takes all those 10 numbers and going to display them inside of here. So if our code works, we should get all these 10 numbers here. Now let's actually go through the matrix. So the matrix, since it has columns and rows, we're going to be using nested loops. So we're going to say I, so by convention, I is usually used when you use it moving through rows, and J is used when you're moving through columns. So I'm going to say for I is equal to 1, 2, and this is 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to say for J is equal to 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to say A of IJ, because we said I is for the rows, J is for the columns, is going to be equal to cells. And that's going to be, what are our cells here? So that's still going to be 14 plus I. And I want this to start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, I was actually counting to this matrix. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I want 4 plus J. And I'm going to have next J. And then I'm going to have next I. So let's actually see what's going on here. So we're going to say for I1, which means we're dealing with the first row. Now for the first J, the first column, we're going to have A11 is equal to cells 15 and 5. So 15 and 5 is this one. Then it's going to loop again. A12 is going to be cells 15 and 6. And then for the third loop here is going to take this one. So you can see what this loop is doing is storing this, this, and this. Then it's moving to the second row, storing this, this, and this. Going to the row after that, storing this, this, and this. And again, with the display code, it's just merely reversing this, right? So we're going to do this. Say cut that. And put it here. So what changes here is basically the rows. So now the rows is 20 plus I. So let's go ahead and run the code. All right, perfect. 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1. Okay, so it's a relatively simple lesson, but it's very, very important, because when we're going to be writing our code is going to be made primarily of creating vectors and arrays or matrices and inputting numbers and using nested loops and so on. So despite the fact that this lesson is very simple in concept, it's still very, very important. So again, let's recap really quickly. An array is an object that stores data. Now it can either be a vector or a matrix. A vector can either be a single column or a single row, and a matrix is a mixture of columns and rows. In this lesson, we learned that we use the dim function, right, to create a vector and a matrix. And in this case, we wanted to create a vector that can store 10 data points and a matrix that can store 3 columns, 3 rows, and 3 columns. We used primarily a nested loop when it comes to inputting values for a matrix. And again, because we're dealing with rows and columns, I is convention for rows, and J is conventionally used when you're defining columns. You can use the any letter that you would like, but this is the what are commonly used for those. Well, this marks the end of this lesson, and I will see you in the next lesson.